The medical ward settled into its night rhythm the way it always did. Slow, deliberate, held together by routine and fluorescent light. Monitors pulsed at measured intervals. 4 pumps whispered. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled once, then went quiet. The smell of disinfectant lingered, sharp but familiar, layered over old coffee and clean linen. She moved without sound. Her badge read ward nurse. No credentials beyond that. No pins, no marks of seniority. Her scrubs were plain navy blue, pressed but worn at the seams, sleeves rolled evenly to the forearm, hair secured tight enough not to shift. She checked a patient's chart at the foot of the bed, eyes moving quickly, efficiently, vitals stable, fluids running as ordered. No alarms. She adjusted the blanket by an inch, just enough to ease pressure on the patient's shoulder. The patient exhaled, deeper than before. "Thank you," the woman murmured, half asleep. She nodded once and moved on. At the nurse's station, 2 junior doctors spoke in low voices over a tablet, debating discharge timing. Their tones suggested certainty, but their eyes flicked back to the screen again and again. "She's probably fine until morning," one said. "Probably," the other echoed. She passed behind them and glanced at the chart they were discussing. Her pace never changed. "She's been trending hypotensive for 2 hours," she said calmly. The doctors looked up, startled. "I'll check again," one replied, already defensive. She did not argue. She continued down the hall. At the end of the ward, security leaned against a wall near the emergency stairwell, arms crossed, radio clipped loosely to his shoulder. He nodded at her as she passed. "Quiet night," he said. She paused just long enough to meet his eyes. "For now." He smiled, assuming it was a figure of speech. She continued on. The ward had 16 beds. She knew every one of them. Who slept lightly, who startled at noise, who needed reassurance before medication. She adjusted lights instead of waking patients, lowered alarms before they escalated, repositioned chairs to keep hallways clear. Nothing she did drew attention. That was intentional. At 11:42 p.m., she stopped at the medication cart and inventoried by sight. 1 vial sat out of alignment, label turned away. She rotated it. Her reflection in the steel surface looked back at her, tired, composed, unreadable. No visible scars, no tension in her jaw, just focus. A call light blinked near the far room. She reached it before the tone sounded. The patient, an older man recovering from surgery, looked anxious. "I heard shouting earlier," he said. "Is something wrong?" "No," she replied. "Staff changeover." It was not true, but it was sufficient. His breathing slowed. She checked his incision, adjusted his position, and left the room exactly as she found it, except calmer. At the station, a charge nurse flipped through staffing sheets, frowning. "We're short 1 tech," she muttered. She glanced at the board, calculated, adjusted. "I'll cover rooms 12 through 15, she said. "That's not your assignment." "It's fine," she replied. The charge nurse hesitated, then nodded. "Just for tonight." She did not correct her. At 11:58, the overhead lights dimmed slightly as the building entered night mode. The change was subtle, but she felt it immediately. The shift in shadow, the narrowing of visibility at the far end of the corridor. She paused near the windows that overlooked the service road. Outside, headlights passed. 1 set slowed longer than expected. She watched until they moved on. Inside, a monitor beeped out of rhythm. Not an alarm, just irregular. She adjusted the lead placement without waking the patient. The beep normalized. At midnight, the security radio crackled, just once. The guard frowned at it, tapped the side, then shrugged. "Probably interference," he said, mostly to himself. She was already walking toward him. "Which channel are you on?" she asked. "Primary. Switch to secondary." He did. The radio went quiet. He looked relieved. "Guess it was the channel." "Maybe," she said. She returned to her rounds. At 12:06 a.m., a door that should have remained locked opened briefly, then closed again. No alarm sounded. She noticed anyway. She stopped in the middle of the corridor, listening. The ward breathed around her. Machines, air handlers, footsteps somewhere above. She adjusted her stance slightly, placing herself where she could see both ends of the hall. Nothing happened. She moved on. In room 9, a patient's 4 bag was nearly empty. She replaced it smoothly, priming the line without introducing air, securing the tubing with practiced hands. The patient stirred. "You're back already." She allowed herself a faint smile. "I don't go far." At the nurse's station, the doctor's conversation had shifted to weekend schedules. One laughed softly. She updated charts, exact times, objective language, no assumptions. At 12:19, the elevator at the far end of the ward chimed. No one exited. She watched the doors until they closed again. The security guard glanced down the hall. That thing's been acting up all week. She nodded. Maintenance knows. He relaxed. She did not. She moved to the ward phone and checked the internal directory. Several lines were unavailable. She made no calls. Instead, she repositioned a supply cart closer to the stairwell, aligning it with the wall as if it belonged there. She moved a chair out of the corridor and into an alcove. The changes were small. They mattered. At 12:31, a junior nurse approached her. "Do you ever get used to nights? You get better at them," she replied. "At what?" "Listening." The nurse frowned, unsure what to do with that, then walked away. She stood still for a moment, eyes closed, counting breaths. The ward felt tight. Not dangerous, not yet, but alert. Outside, engines idled again. More than one this time. She stepped to the window and looked down. Black vehicles lined the service road. No markings, no lights flashing. They did not belong to the hospital. She did not react. She returned to the nurse's station and closed the chart she had been reviewing. Her movements remained calm, unhurried. At the security desk, the radio crackled again, longer this time. The guard straightened. That's odd. She looked at the clock. 12:37 a.m. She placed her hand flat on the counter, grounding herself. "Stay here," she told him quietly. "Why?" "In case someone asks for you." He nodded, reassured by the normality of the request. She turned back toward the ward. The automatic doors, at the far end, opened. Not wide. Just enough. She stopped walking. The ward held its breath. Whatever was coming had arrived at the edge of routine, and she was ready to meet it. The automatic doors closed again without anyone stepping through. Most people would have dismissed it. She did not. She stood still for a full second, listening for what followed. Footsteps, voices, the soft echo of movement on tile. Nothing. The ward resumed its low mechanical rhythm. Ventilation hummed. A monitor chimed and settled. Somewhere, a patient coughed and turned in bed. Normal sounds, carefully normal. She resumed walking, but her pace had changed. Not faster, more deliberate. Each step placed to avoid echo. Each pause long enough to let the space speak. She reached the end of the corridor and checked the stairwell door. Locked, cold to the touch. The security desk was visible in the reflection of the glass. Guard seated, posture relaxed, radio resting against his chest. Good. She returned toward the nurse's station, eyes scanning details no one else tracked. Doors slightly ajar. Equipment left where it should not be. The angle of a wheelchair that suggested it had been moved recently, then abandoned. She corrected nothing yet. At the station, the charge nurse was on the phone, voice low and irritated. "I know it's short notice, but we're already understaffed." She caught only fragments. Scheduling, administration, nothing urgent. She checked the wall clock again. 12:41 a.m. She picked up the internal phone and dialed a short extension. No ring, just a flat tone. She hung up and tried another. Same result. She did not look surprised. A junior doctor approached, holding a tablet. "Can you double-check room 14? His pressure dropped again. She nodded. "I'll take care of it." She walked with him part way, then stopped. "Have you seen anyone new on the ward tonight?" He frowned. Knew how. "Visitors, maintenance, transport." He shook his head. "No." "Why?" "No reason," she said, and continued on. In room 14, the patient was pale, breathing shallow. She adjusted the bed, elevated the legs slightly, and checked the foresight. The line was patent, but the flow rate was wrong. She corrected it. The monitor stabilized within seconds. The doctor watched, relieved. "Thanks. I don't know why it happens," she said. "He left it at that." As she exited the room, she noticed the emergency exit sign at the far end of the hall flicker once, then steady. She stopped beneath it and looked up. Power fluctuations were rare in this building. Redundant systems. Backup generators tested weekly. She took 3 steps back and studied the corridor as a whole. Too quiet. She returned to the nurse's station and opened the supply drawer beneath the counter. Inside, among gauze and gloves, was a small laminated card. She slid it into her pocket without looking at it. The charge nurse ended her call with a sigh. Apparently facilities is dealing with something downstairs. What kind of something? She asked. They didn't say. Just told us to stay put. She nodded. They usually do. The charge nurse studied her for a moment. You're calm. She met her gaze. It helps the patients. At 12:49, the security guard's radio crackled again, this time clear enough to make out a voice beneath the static. Repeat, perimeter. The transmission cut off. The guard sat up straight. T's not our channel. She was already moving toward him. Who else has access to your radio frequency? She asked. He shrugged. Police, maybe. Emergency management. Anyone federal? He blinked. I don't think so. She reached out and adjusted the volume, then switched channels again. Silence. Did you log the vehicles outside? She asked. He shook his head. They didn't come through the main entrance. She nodded once. They won't. She turned away before he could ask more. At the far end of the ward, the automatic doors opened again. This time, 2 men stepped through. They wore dark jackets, no insignia, hands visible, calm, controlled. They stopped just inside the threshold, scanning the ward. She stood between them and the patient rooms without making it obvious. One of the men approached the nurse's station. We're looking for the charge nurse. The charge nurse stiffened. That's me. Can I help you? The man smiled politely. We need access to the lower level. That's not part of this ward. We're aware. She stepped forward slightly. Facilities handles that. The man's eyes flicked to her badge. Ward nurse. Facilities is unavailable, he said. This is time sensitive. She held his gaze. So are the patients. There was a pause, not confrontational, evaluative. The second man shifted his weight, positioning himself where he could see both exits. She noticed. You'll need authorization, the charge nurse said. We have it, the man replied, just not from you. She inhaled slowly. Who are you with? She asked. The man hesitated, a fraction too long. Emergency response, he said. She nodded. Which branch? Another pause. State. She smiled faintly. Then yo. Or in the wrong building. The man's expression hardened slightly. We're not. She did not raise her voice. This ward is sealed after midnight. Any access requires hospital security and administrative clearance. The guard at the desk looked between them, uncertain. The man leaned closer. We don't have time for protocol. She met his eyes. Protocol is what keeps people alive. The tension stretched. Then the man stepped back. We'll wait. He and his partner moved to stand near the wall, not blocking exits, not advancing. She returned to the station and resumed charting. Her hands were steady. At 12:56, a different sound cut through the ward. Low, distant, unmistakable. Engines, multiple, heavier than before. The windows vibrated faintly. The charge nurse looked up. What is that? She did not answer. She walked to the window and looked down. A convoy had pulled up to the service entrance. Black SUVs, one armored van, doors opening in sequence. Men in plain clothes stepped out first, scanning. Then others followed, coordinated, purposeful, not hospital staff. The automatic doors opened again. This time, they did not hesitate. A man in a dark suit entered the ward, flanked by 2 others. His posture was different, less defensive, more certain. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes dropped to her badge, then back to her face. He took a step closer. We're looking for our crisis specialist, he said. The charge nurse started to speak. She raised one finger, just enough to pause her. The man's gaze sharpened. You're late, she said quietly. He exhaled. We had to secure the perimeter. She nodded. ER perimeter is unstable. East access compromised. You'll want to reroute. The man glanced back at his team, then returned his attention to her. Yes, ma'am, he said. Every head in the ward turned. She did not acknowledge it. She reached into her pocket and removed a laminated card, placed it on the counter, turned it so only he could see. His posture changed immediately. Understood, he said. We'll proceed under your direction. She slid the card back into her pocket. Keep it quiet, she said. Patients come first. He nodded, as always. The convoy outside settled into position. Inside, the ward remained calm, but the line between routine and crisis had been crossed, and everyone in the room felt it. The men from the convoy spread out without drawing attention. They did not wear uniforms. No weapons were visible. They moved like people accustomed to crowded spaces, controlled, aware, careful not to alarm. To anyone watching casually, they looked like administrators, consultants, late-night officials handling paperwork no one else wanted. Only she noticed how they positioned themselves, one near the stairwell, one by the service elevator, another outside the ward doors, just beyond sight, containment without announcement. She returned to the corridor and resumed her rounds, clipboard in hand. To the patients, nothing had changed. A nurse doing her job, a calm presence in the night. At the nurse's station, the charge nurse leaned closer. "Who are they?" "Support," she said. "For what?" She adjusted a chart. "For us." The charge nurse did not press further. At 1:04 a.m., the first real sign of the crisis surfaced. A patient monitor spiked, heart rate climbing fast, oxygen dropping. Alarms cut through the quiet. She reached the room before an "Yon else." The patient was sitting upright, eyes wide, gasping. Sweat soaked the sheets. She assessed in seconds. No trauma, no medication error, pupils reactive, environmental. She moved to the window and pressed her palm against the glass. The vibration was stronger now, rhythmic. Vehicles repositioning outside. She turned back to the patient and lowered her voice. "You're safe. Breathe with me." She guided him through slow breaths while adjusting oxygen flow. His vitals began to stabilize. Outside the room, one of the suited men waited. "Pressure wave," he said quietly. "They're testing access points." She nodded. "They won't breach here." "How can you be sure?" "Because they don't want casualties yet." He absorbed that. Yet, she stepped into the hall. "What's your latest?" "External threat. Coordinated, not local. We intercepted chatter about the hospital an hour ago." She frowned. "You should have called sooner. We didn't know you were on shift." She met his eyes. "You know now, at 1:11 the lights flickered again, longer this time. Backup systems engaged with a low mechanical groan. Patients stirred. Voices rose. She moved through the ward, steadying hands, lowering fears. "Just a system test," she told one man. "Storm?" another asked. "No," she replied. "But we're prepared." The suited man watched her work, speaking quietly into his sleeve. "She's keeping them calm." A voice responded, inaudible. At the far end of the corridor, one of the earlier men, the ones who had claimed emergency response, shifted nervously. "They lied," the guard whispered to her when she passed. "Didn't they?" "Yes," she said. "But they were useful." "For what?" "For revealing themselves." At 1:18, a muffled impact echoed from below, felt more than heard. She stopped walking. Everyone else froze. Another impact followed, heavier. The suited man approached. "They're forcing the loading bay." She nodded. "Then we move to containment." He hesitated. "This is a hospital." She looked at him. "Exactly." She stepped to the nurse's station and picked up the intercom handset. "Attention staff," she said calmly. "Initiate internal protocol Delta. Quiet execution only." The charge nurse stared at her. "That protocol requires—" She met her gaze. "It requires someone to take responsibility. A beat." The charge nurse nodded and began making calls. Down the hall, doors locked softly, one by one. Curtains drawn, lights lowered, patients were relocated subtly, beds rolling without urgency, without panic. At 1:26, footsteps thundered from below, multiple, fast, uncoordinated. The suited man's radio crackled. Contact imminent. She positioned herself, at the center of the ward, hands clasped behind her back. "Hold," she said. The footsteps reached the stairwell door and stopped. Voices murmured. Frustration. They tried the handle. Locked. She exhaled slowly. "They won't come through here," she said. "Not yet." "Why?" the man asked. "Because they don't know what they're walking into." A loud bang shook the door. Patients cried out. She raised her voice just enough. "It's all right. Stay in your rooms." Her calm carried. The banging stopped. Silence returned, heavy and charged. She looked at the suited man. "Get your people ready. No visible force, no escalation unless I say—" He nodded. "You're in command." She did not acknowledge the title. She turned back to the ward, eyes S. Harp, posture relaxed. The crisis had arrived, and the hospital was no longer just a place of healing. The stairwell door rattled once more, then went still. No shouting, no demands. Whoever was on the other side was listening now. She stood where she was, centered in the corridor, letting the silence stretch. Silence unsettled people more than noise. It forced decisions. A suited man approached her from the side. "They're probing," he said. "Testing response time." "They already learned what they needed," she replied. "We didn't rush." A voice echoed faintly through the stairwell door. Male, controlled, amplified just enough to carry. "This is a restricted operation. We need medical access." She stepped closer to the door, stopping 2 meters short. Close enough to be heard. Far enough to remain out of reach. "You already have medical access," she said evenly. "The city has 3 trauma centers within 5 miles. This one is sealed." A pause. "That wasn't a request." She tilted her head slightly. "Then you should have brought authority." A second voice joined the first. Lower, impatient. "Open the door." She did not move. Behind her, the ward remained quiet. Patients stayed in their rooms. Staff followed instructions without fully understanding why. Fear stayed contained, like pressure behind glass. The stairwell door shook again, harder this time. The frame held. She turned her head slightly, not taking her eyes off the door. "How long until external perimeter is stable?" she asked. 6 minutes, the suited man replied. "Make it 5. He spoke into his sleeve and moved away. The door rattled again, then stopped. Footsteps retreated down the stairs. She exhaled slowly. "They're repositioning," she said. "They'll try another access point." As if summoned, a security alarm chirped briefly from the east wing, then cut off. The charge nurse looked panicked. "That alarm? False," she said. "Triggered intentionally. By them? By us?" The charge nurse stared. "I didn't authorize. I did." There was no arrogance in her voice, just certainty. At the end of the hall, one of the plainclothes agents signaled discreetly. She walked toward him. "East wing sealed," he said. "They attempted a manual override. And failed?" "Yes," she nodded. "Good. They're impatient now." "How do you know?" "Because they expected confusion." Instead, they found discipline. A sudden crash echoed from below, metal on concrete, louder than before. Closer. A patient screamed. She turned and raised her voice, calm but firm. "Everyone stay where you are." She entered the patient room and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "It's contained. Look at me." He did. His breathing slowed. When she stepped back into the corridor, the suited man was waiting. "They've breached the loading bay," he said. "Minimal resistance." She nodded. "Then they're committed. To what? To getting something they shouldn't." She walked back to the nurses' station and pulled up the hospital layout on a screen. She studied it briefly, then pointed. "They'll come this way," she said. "They'll avoid high-traffic areas. They'll assume staff will scatter." "And we won't," the man said. "No," she agreed. "We'll compress." She began issuing instructions. Quiet, precise. Beds repositioned to block secondary corridors. Supply carts moved to create visual obstructions. Lights dimmed further, forcing silhouettes. Nothing looked defensive. Everything was. At 1:41 a.m., footsteps echoed from the service corridor. Multiple, deliberate now. She took one step forward. The first intruder rounded the corner and stopped short. He wore tactical gear, face partially obscured, weapon held low but ready. His eyes flicked over the ward, registering the stillness, the lack of chaos. This was not what he expected. She stood in front of him, hands visible, posture relaxed. "You're in a medical ward," she said. "Lower your weapon." He hesitated. Behind him, 2 more figures appeared, spreading slightly. "This doesn't concern you," the lead man said. She met his gaze. "Everything that happens here concerns me." He took a step forward. She did not retreat. Behind her, suited figures shifted subtly, positioning without drawing attention. The intruder's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" she answered truthfully. "The person responsible for everyone still breathing in this building." He raised his weapon an inch. She shook her head once. "If you fire, you won't leave." His finger tightened. Then he noticed the exits, the angles, the way the ward seemed to close in around him. He lowered the weapon slightly. She stepped closer, voice dropping. "You can walk away, or you can make this worse." The choice hung in the air. After a long moment, the man signaled his team to hold. "We need 1 patient," he said. "Room 23. Her expression did not change. "There is no room 23. His jaw tightened. She knew then. "They lied to you," she said. "Whoever sent you." He stared at her, realization dawning. Behind him, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, approaching, coordinated, external perim. Ita was closing. She took a step back, giving him space. "This is your last clean exit." He hesitated, then signaled a retreat. They backed away slowly, never turning their backs. When they were gone, the ward exhaled as one. The suited man approached her. "You just stopped an armed team without a shot." She looked down the corridor where patients slept, unaware of how close danger had come. "This isn't over," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The retreat was temporary. She knew it the moment the intruders disappeared back into the service corridor. People who withdrew that cleanly did not give up. They recalculated. She walked the ward again, slower now, letting her presence settle nerves. A hand on a shoulder, a quiet word, no promises, just stability. At the nurse's station, the charge nurse watched her with new eyes. "You've done this before." "Yes," she said. "Here?" "No." The charge nurse nodded, accepting the answer without understanding it. The suited man returned, lowering his voice. "They're repositioning outside the building. We've lost visual on 2. "They're going vertical," she said. "Upper floors?" "Roof, mechanical access." He frowned. "That puts them near the oxygen intakes." She nodded. "Which is why we move now." She turned to the ward intercom again. "Staff initiate silent relocation. Phase 2 only. No panic, no questions." The staff moved with purpose, guided by her tone more than her words. Patients were rolled away from exterior walls. Portable oxygen units were swapped in without explanation. Windows were sealed manually. One nurse whispered, "Why are we doing this?" "Because air matters," she replied. At 1:58 a.m., a low hiss echoed through. "Cheech!" The ventilation system. Brief, almost imperceptible. She felt it. She moved to the nearest vent and held a gloved hand near the grill. Nothing visible. No smell. "Seal all vents in this corridor," she said. The suited man relayed the order instantly. "They're testing dispersal," he said. "Yes," she replied. "Non-lethal. For now." "For now," he echoed. She checked the time again. 2:03 a.m. Every decision now would narrow options. She walked to the supply room and closed the door behind her. Inside, she opened a locked cabinet using a code she had not entered in years. Inside, respirators, sealed masks, emergency filters. She handed them out quietly to staff working critical rooms. No explanation, no resistance. At the far end of the ward, the security guard approached her. His hands shook slightly. "I didn't sign up for this," he said. She met his eyes. "You signed up to protect people," he swallowed. "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing you can't do," she said. "Watch the monitors. Tell me if anything changes." He nodded, steadier now. At 2:11, the lights went out completely. Backup power engaged instantly, bathing the ward in dim amber light. Patients stirred. A child cried. She moved toward the sound and knelt beside the bed. "It's okay," she said softly. "Just a power switch." The child clutched her sleeve. "Are we in danger?" She considered the question, then answered honestly. "We're being protected." At the nurse's station, the suited man received a transmission. His face tightened. "They're inside the building again," he said. "Different team. Smarter." She nodded. "They'll avoid confrontation this time." "And do what?" "Force a mistake." She leaned over the hoe. Spittle lay out again, tracing a path with her finger. "They'll isolate a section, create pressure, try to make us move a patient." "Which patient?" he asked. She looked up. "The one they think is here. Is he?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." The suited man studied her. "You moved him earlier." "Yes." "When?" "Before they arrived." He exhaled slowly. "You anticipated this." "I listened," she said. At 2:19, a code blue alarm sounded. Far end of the ward. Staff reacted instinctively, moving toward it. She raised her hand. "Hold." The alarm continued. "It's real," a nurse said. She listened, counting seconds between beeps. "No," she said. "It's a loop. Synthetic." The suited man swore under his breath. "Diversion." She turned to the staff. "Stay where you are." She walked alone toward the alarm. The room was empty. Monitor flashing without a patient attached. She reached behind the bed and disconnected a small device taped to the frame. The alarm stopped. Footsteps echoed behind her, fast, close. She turned just as two intruders rounded the corner. They froze when they saw her. No fear in her face. No confusion. "You're late," she said. One raised a hand, signaling hold. "We're not here to hurt anyone," he said. "Then leave," she replied. "We need access to your systems." She shook her head. "You won't get it," the man studied her. "You're not just a nurse." She did not answer. Instead, she stepped aside, revealing the suited men behind her, positioned perfectly. The intruders backed away, retreating again. As they disappeared, one looked back at her. "This isn't finished," she nodded. "It never is." When the corridor was clear, the suited man approached. "They know you now." She looked down the hall, listening to the ward breathe. "They always do," she said. The building settled into a tense equilibrium. No alarms, no shouting, just the constant awareness that pressure was building somewhere out of sight. She walked the ward again, slower than before. Now every movement mattered. The intruders knew her presence. They would adjust for it. At the nurse's station, the suited man spoke quietly into his sleeve, then looked up. "They've cut external power to 2 adjacent blocks. City response is rerouting. They want isolation," she said. "They want us to feel alone." "Are we?" She shook her head. "Not if we don't act like it." At 2:31 a.m., the first patient began to decompensate. A man in his 60s, post-operative, lungs already fragile. His oxygen saturation dropped without warning. The monitor alarm cut through the ward. This one was real. She was at his bedside in seconds, adjusting oxygen, elevating his head, listening to his breathing. "Pulmonary stress," she said. "Likely triggered by the ventilation disruption." A nurse hovered. "ICU transfer?" She shook her head. "Too risky right now." She stabilized him manually, staying longer than protocol required. Her hands were steady, precise. The patient's breathing eased. Outside the room, the suited man waited. "They're forcing us to choose," he said. "Yes," she replied. "So we won't." At 2:38, a fire alarm began to sound, not in the ward, but 2 floors below. Smoke sensors. Evacuation protocol. Staff looked to her. She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the pattern of the alarm. The timing was wrong. Too uniform. "Controlled release," she said. "They want vertical movement. The charge—" Nurse swallowed. "We're supposed to evacuate." "We're supposed to protect patients," she replied. "We stay." She picked up the intercom. "Fire alarm is being assessed. Do not move patients unless instructed." Her voice carried authority without volume. At 2:44, the ventilation system hissed again, stronger this time. A faint smell reached her nose. Not smoke. Chemical, mild, but wrong. She reacted instantly. Masks, now. Staff complied without question. Patients were masked gently, reassured with calm words. The suited man's voice tightened. "They're escalating." "Yes," she said. "Which means they're losing control." She moved toward the central corridor, positioning herself where all paths converged. Footsteps approached, measured, confident. 3 intruders emerged this time, better equipped, more disciplined. They stopped when they saw her. "You're impressive," the lead one said. "But this ends now." She studied him, his stance, his breathing, the slight tremor in his left hand. "You're tired," she said, "and you're running out of time." He smiled thinly. "We only need 1 opening." She gestured subtly. Doors slid shut behind them, not loudly. "Just enough." The suited men appeared at the edges of the corridor, blocking exits without raising weapons. The intruder's smile faded. "You could still walk away," she said. "No casualties, no charges, and let you win." She shook her head. "This isn't about winning." The fire alarm below cut off abruptly. The ventilation hiss stopped. Sirens outside grew louder, closer. The intruder's radio crackled, urgent overlapping voices. He listened, then looked at her again. "You planned this." She did not deny it. He raised his hands slow. "Why? We're done here." They were escorted out quietly, without spectacle. As the corridor cleared, the ward seemed to exhale. She leaned against the wall for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight settle in her chest. The suited man approached. "External threat is collapsing. Remaining units are withdrawing." She nodded. "Good. But there's a complication," he added. She straightened. "There always is. They're demanding to speak with you, officially." She looked back at the patient rooms, the sleeping faces, the steady monitors. Not yet, she said. People first. The ward did not celebrate. There was no release of tension, no quiet laughter, no whispered relief. Only the slow return of normal sounds, machines cycling, footsteps measured again, the steady rhythm of breathing behind closed doors. She moved through it all with the same care as before, but the cost was starting to show, not in her posture, in the pauses between actions, in the way she lingered half a second longer at each bedside. The suited man waited near the nurse's station, hands clasped, voice low. "Federal Command wants you downstairs. Now," she finished, adjusting a patient's fall before answering. "I'm busy. They're insisting." She met his eyes. "I don't work for insistence." He hesitated. "They're worried about liability, jurisdiction, questions. Questions can wait," she said. "Lungs cannot." He did not argue again. At 2:57 a.m., the patient she had stabilized earlier began to decline once more. Oxygen saturation dipped. Blood pressure followed. This time it would not correct easily. She stood at the bedside assessing options. ICU transfer was still dangerous. Sedation would compromise. Breathing. Waiting would be worse. She made the call. "Prep for bedside intervention," she said quietly. A nurse swallowed. "That requires authorization." "I'm authorizing it," she replied. The charge nurse looked torn. "If something goes wrong, if we do nothing," she said, "it definitely will." They worked together in silence, hands past instruments. Monitors were adjusted. No one spoke unless necessary. She took responsibility for every step. The patient's vitals wavered, then slowly stabilized. When it was over, she remained at the bedside until the numbers held steady on their own. Outside the room, the suited man watched through the glass. "You just violated 3 protocols." She removed her gloves. "I followed one." "Which one?" "Care." At 3:14 a.m., footsteps echoed again, but these were different. Slower, heavier, official. A man in a dark federal jacket entered the ward, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. He stopped when he saw her. "You're the nurse," he said. She met his gaze. "Yes, we need a statement." She glanced at the patient rooms. "Later. This incident involved federal assets and—" She interrupted him gently. "It involved patients. They're still here." He bristled. "Do you know who I am?" She nodded. "Yes." "Then you know I can compel." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "And you know you won't, not tonight." The man studied her face, searching for leverage. He found none. Behind him, the suited man gave a small nod. "Supportive." "Final." The federal official exhaled sharply. "Fine. When?" "When the ward is stable," she said, "and not here." He turned and left without another word. At 3:29 a.m., the last external units withdrew. The sirens faded. Power was fully restored. The crisis was over. No announcement was made. She removed her mask and washed her hands at the sink, watching the water run red-tinted from sanitizer, not blood. The charge nurse approached quietly. "They're calling you a hero." She dried her hands. "They shouldn't. Why not?" "Because heroes get remembered," she said, "and this needs to be forgotten." The charge nurse nodded, understanding more than she said. She returned to her rounds. By 3:47 a.m., the ward had returned to its night rhythm. Machines pulsed. Patients slept. She paused at the window one last time. The service road was empty now. She checked her watch. Morning would come soon. And when it did, she would still be just a nurse. Dawn did not arrive all at once. It crept in through narrow windows, pale and indifferent, as if the night had not nearly broken the building apart. She was restocking a cart when the suited man returned. His tone was different now. "Careful." "They're back," he said. She did not look up. "They never left. This is command, internal. They want control of the narrative." She placed the last syringe in its slot. "Narratives don't keep people alive. They're on their way up." She nodded once. "Then let them walk." The elevator chimed at 4:12 a.m. 3 people stepped out, all senior, all accustomed to rooms going quiet when they entered, badges visible. Authority worn openly. They stopped when they saw her standing in the corridor, blocking nothing, inviting nothing. The lead official spoke first. "We're assuming command of this facility." She held his gaze. "You're late." His jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" "The threat is gone," she said. "Patients are stable. Staff is exhausted. This ward doesn't need command. It needs silence." "You made unilateral decisions," he said. You exceeded scope, she nodded. Yes, you compromised federal operations. She shook her head. No, I prevented a massacre. The word landed heavily. He looked past her, at the ward, at patients sleeping, at nurses moving quietly, pretending not to listen. You don't get to decide that, he said. She stepped aside just enough to reveal the suited man. Standing straight now, badge fully visible. She does, he said. She always has. The officials exchanged glances. The lead one turned back to her. Who are you? She answered without hesitation. The person you call when nothing else works. Silence stretched. Finally, he nodded once. This ends here. She met his gaze. It already has. They turned and left without another word. No handshakes, no acknowledgements, just retreat. She waited until the elevator doors closed before releasing the breath she had been holding. The suited man approached. They'll file reports. I know. Your name will surface. For a moment, she said. Then it won't. He hesitated. You could stay. Officially. She shook her head. Someone has to finish the shift. Morning staff arrived in quiet waves, fresh scrubs, travel mugs, tired eyes adjusting to fluorescent light. The night shift handed over charts with practiced efficiency, omitting details that did not belong in official records. She stood at the back of the handoff, listening. No mention of intruders, no alarms, no federal presence, just vitals, medications, follow-ups, exactly as it should be. When the meeting ended, the charge nurse lingered. Administration wants to... See you later. She nodded. They usually do. You're not worried? She considered the question. No. The charge nurse smiled faintly. I didn't think so. By 6:02 a.m. the ward was fully awake. Patients asked for breakfast. Call lights blinked. Routine reasserted itself, stubborn and comforting. She moved through it, finishing tasks she had delayed during the night. Documentation completed with careful neutrality. Language chosen to reveal nothing and explain everything. At one bedside, the patient she had stabilized slept peacefully. Oxygen steady, color improved. She checked the chart one last time and closed it. Outside the room, the suited man waited. He looked out of place now, like a shadow lingering after dawn. They're clearing the perimeter, he said. Officially, nothing happened. She nodded. Good. They want to thank you. She shook her head. Tell them to thank the staff. They want to debrief. Tell them no. He studied her. You know they'll keep watching, yes, and if something like this happens again, she met his gaze, then I'll be wherever I'm needed. He reached into his jacket and handed her a folded paper. In case you change your mind. She did not open it. She slid it into her pocket. Take care of them, she said, nodding toward the ward. He did not argue. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of hospital life. At 7:18 a.m., she clocked out. In the locker room, she changed slowly, muscles finally acknowledging the strain. She washed her face and studied her reflection. Just a nurse. Tired, composed, anonymous. She tied her shoes and slung her bag over her shoulder. As she walked toward the exit, a junior nurse called after her. Hey, thank you. For last night. She paused. For what? For staying calm. She nodded once. That's part of the job. Outside, the city moved on. Traffic, sirens, morning light reflecting off glass. She walked away from the hospital without looking back. The building stood unchanged behind her. No plaque, no report, just another night shift completed. She did not go home right away. She stopped at a small cafe 2 blocks from the hospital, the kind that opened early for night shift workers and never asked questions. She ordered black coffee and sat by the window, hands wrapped around the cup, letting the warmth sink in. The news played silently on a television above the counter. Traffic updates, weather, nothing about hospitals, nothing about convoys or alarms or near misses. Good. Her phone vibrated once. A message from an unknown number, all clear. Perimeter restored, thank you. She deleted it without replying. Across the street, a delivery truck backed into an alley. A woman hurried past, late for work. Life moved forward, indifferent to what had almost happened. She finished her coffee and stood, the fatigue settling deeper now that she allowed it. On her way out, the barista called after her. Rough night? She paused. Then odded. Busy. Outside, she walked the long way home, choosing streets with more people, more noise, blending back into the city. At an intersection, she waited for the light to change. A police cruiser rolled past, lights off. The officer glanced at her, then looked away. She crossed the street. In her apartment, she set her bag down and opened the window. Morning air carried distant sirens, harmless now. She removed her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. From her pocket, the folded paper slid out. She looked at it for a long moment, then placed it in a drawer without opening it. There would be no follow-up, no commendation, no career shift. That was the agreement. She lay back and closed her eyes. At the hospital, charts would be reviewed. Systems reset. Staff would talk in fragments, unsure what was real and what was fear. And in time, even that would fade. By the afternoon, the ward would feel ordinary again. She would return for her next shift, badge clipped, scrubs pressed, voice calm. Just a nurse. Exactly where she was meant to be,